All right, welcome to a Nerd Meets World editorial. It's the first one of these we've done. I'm one of your hosts from the podcast, Dalton Barrett.
And I'm in here with Dalton. I'm Jamie McCright.
So today we're going to talk about something that's a very touchy subject and honestly a very scary subject if you're a nerd like us, and that is comic book movie fatigue.
I've heard quite a bit about that here in the past few days.
Yeah, it's a very scary topic because all of us, of course, love comic book movies. It's one of our favorite things because we're such big comic book fans.
Right.
But honestly, I think it is going to happen. Some people have compared comic book movies as going the way of the Western, and I don't think that it'll quite be that drastic because you see one Western every, 5 years now.
Oh, and the thing about Westerns, too, is I also agree with you. It's not going to be as dramatic as the fade out of the Westerns because if you look back to when Westerns were so popular, you're seeing Westerns that used to be, like they were, and now were comedies. If I think that if comic book fatigue or comic book movie fatigue is going to happen soon, it's not going to be as, segregated as far as that goes.
Well, that and the Western had its own style, but
right.
Every Western movie is done in the exact same style.
Right.
And comic book movies are so different. One exception I'm actually going to give to that is the most praised comic book movies, the Marvel movies. Lately, it seems like they found their formula,
right,
and they're really sticking with it. Almost every Marvel movie feels like it's a rehash of the Marvel formula.
And I can agree with that as far as the Avengers movie and the newly released, not so newly released, Captain America Civil War. That is the Marvel. That's the formula right there.
Yeah, that's their formula for their team up movies, and their formula for their regular movies is pretty much a solo version of that.
And that's probably why Deadpool hit the box offices so well, is because it was within the Marvel formula with but it wasn't. You know what I'm saying?
That's a different universe. That's Fox, bud.
Let's just leave that silence in there because I want everybody to know that. Yeah.
Fox has their own formula too, the XMen movies, and it's very hit or miss. Bryan Singer has made the same XMen movie probably, how many times has he done it? He's done it 5 times now, and that's why I think that the newest one was so poorly received at first. It did have good fan reviews because we're so used to seeing those Marvel Cinematic Universe movies that are so much the same, and then we see this one, and it's different from those. But at the same time, it's basically the same as Days of Future Past and X-Men 1, 2, and not so much 3.
Right. I mean, I enjoyed the original X-Men movies, but that was just because at the time they were something
so
different. Right.
They're what honestly kicked off the modern age of superhero movies, I think. I think we're definitely living in the golden age of superhero movies, which I think really started with, your X-Men's and your Spider-Man trilogy, those movies. They really kind of kicked it off.
Right.
And it went through kind of a slow stage, probably, mid-2000s, 2005. And then I think it got kicked off once again with Batman Begins and really the start of the Marvel Cinematic Universe with Iron Man.
And another thing when we're talking about comic book movie fatigue, every time we see a slowdown when it comes to comic book movies, there's always that movie that punches through and it's something different, and then it gets the cycle started again.
Yeah, I do think that comic book movie fatigue, this is what this video is about, is how it's going to start and kind of our predictions for how it's going to go. And a lot of people are speculating it's going to come from the mainstream audience. The mainstream audience, they're going to get sick of it and they're going to quit watching. But I honestly don't think that's where it's going to come from. I think we've seen it very much so here recently. Batman v Superman, not even well received by fans. Suicide Squad, some fans loved it and others didn't. And I think that the comic book movie fatigue is going to come from the fans. We're going to get sick of seeing poor representations of our characters, which has happened very much so in Batman v Superman. That's definitely the instance.
Time and time again.
Yeah, that's the instance that comes to mind for me, is a real deconstruction of our characters. And I'm afraid if that continues, then comic book movie fatigue is definitely going to come from the inside. Right.
And it's the nerds like us that are going to start corroding that industry away as we see more and more of our favorite superheroes portrayed not the way that we grew up with and things of that nature.
Now, I definitely don't see superhero movies ever disappearing completely.
And they've been around since the 60s, and they'll continue to stick around.
Yeah, the first cinematic one that I can think of that was a big box office hit would definitely be Superman, the original Superman movie, Christopher Reeve.
Right.
It really kicked off the era of not necessarily modern superhero movies, but definitely just getting them out there. And if you look at that, you had Superman, which came out, great, big hit.
Right.
And then you had Superman 2 in those movies, and then eventually you had your Howard the Duck. Howard the Duck was actually, this is a little just tidbit, little bit of information. Howard the Duck was the first Marvel movie ever released theatrically.
Really?
Yes.
Huh. Would not expect that from Marvel.
Yeah, and then they had, you had your Tim Burton Batman movie. That one was excellent. That was the first.
That was so good.
It's still one of my favorite Batman movies of all time. I hold it up there with at least Batman Begins. But after that you had Batman Returns, which was still pretty good, but it was definitely a little more weird. It was more Tim Burton being Tim Burton than Tim Burton making a comic book Batman movie. Then after that one, they handed directing reins over to his name slips my mind, but he directed Batman Forever, and that one wasn't quite as well received by audiences. It was,
I didn't like it.
I don't hate Batman Forever. I definitely don't like it. And then after that one, you had your Batman and Robin, and that really almost, I think that was one of the instances where it almost killed the comic book movie industry.
Yeah, and I want to say that I didn't even bother to go see that.
Well, I mean, you weren't alive.
I would never bother to go see that. Were I alive?
I personally like it. Just because of how campy it is. It's one of those movies that's so bad it's good.
Oh yeah, I'm a horror movie. I love seeing somebody get their eyes slit. But my favorite horror movies are the ones that are so cheesy, it's unrealistic, because at that point it's just damn right funny.
Yeah. So I think that if comic book movies do slow down, which is inevitable, it's inevitably going to happen. I think when they do slow down, we're not going to see it get to the point of the Western, or even to a more recent extent, the disaster movie, which was really big in the 90s. But now you see maybe one a year, if that.
The most recent one that comes to mind is probably the big box office hit was probably 2012.
The biggest one that comes to mind for me is actually a sequel, and that would be Independence Day Resurgence.
But I heard that was not received well.
Well, it wasn't. Neither was 2012. No real disaster movies.
I enjoyed 2012.
No disaster movies are really being received well because we're sick of it. We see it. We're used to. Basically, they got started because we could do them finally. We could do big disaster movies like this with the discovery of CGI. And that's the gimmick of that has gotten old.
Right.
So I definitely don't see them going quite that drastically. I do think what's going to happen is we're going to see the very much slowdown of these light, campy, exciting, like your Marvel movies. And I think we're going to see more of the dark tone, and they're going to start adapting more dark characters. And I think we're going to see a rise in R-rated comic book movies, such as Deadpool. And one that comes to mind that was really good and well received that was in that darker tone is Watchmen. Granted, that is a little older film, but I think that we're going to start seeing some more of those, like maybe an R-rated Wolverine movie.
But if you're at the point where you're calling yourself a nerd and you're watching this podcast, then you have seen Watchmen. I mean,
yeah, for sure.
That's a cult classic, and I think it's more one of those films that the older it gets, the more people are starting to realize that this is the direction we want to head. This is what wants to be watched. This is what wants to be seen.
Well, I definitely don't want to only see those dark movies because I think not every character that's brought to life deserves those dark movies.
And I definitely wouldn't want to see Spider-Man.
No.
Because, I mean, that's just one of those films that's, it stuck to a formula, but they stopped when they knew it was time to stop, and every single film they put out, at least in the past maybe 10 years, was good, minus Amazing Spider-Man. That was complete shit.
And Amazing Spider-Man 2, and...
I didn't even see that.
To a lesser extent, Spider-Man 3.
And Spider-Man 3 wasn't, horrible, but...
Spider-Man 3, I think, was bad, but it's another one of those movies that's so bad that you can't help but love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, if you watch Spider-Man 1 and 2, you're going to go watch Spider-Man 3.
Yeah, they're great movies,
They are.
I think. And they are a little cheesy, but I think that was one of the things that the director Sam Raimi did so well, was he managed to capture a comic book in a film. And probably one of the best instances that we've seen of that.
Right.
So where do you think that comic book movies are going to go after the comic book movie fatigue?
I mean, you brought up a good point as far as the dark tones and the more darker characters with a simpler past, and
Not even necessarily the dark tones, more the R-rated, the more adult superhero
and that's
movies.
where I was going to go with this. Everybody seems to like Deadpool, and it was R-rated, and something that we can see consistently carried out through the past 10, 15 years is comedy movies. You don't usually see a drop in comedy movies because everybody likes to laugh. I think it'll probably go with the formula of Deadpool as far as some of our more beloved comic book characters being brought to a funnier light, something with a little darker humor in it at least, and something for more of the adult audiences. We've got to realize that these are the characters we watched as kids, and the older we get, we're going to want to see those characters brought to the humor that we enjoy now, and not the humor we enjoyed as kids.
Yeah, I definitely think that's kind of a direction we're going to head in. And I think some characters definitely deserve a darker movie than they've even gotten. I think Wolverine definitely needs an R-rated movie.
I mean, he has such a dark tone, and he's funny in the comic books even, you know?
Yeah, he's got a little humor to him.
Right.
But a lot of his humor bounces off of other characters, which they could do very well in these movies.
Right.
And I think the Wolverine movie, when they reboot it, I'm not sure if the upcoming Wolverine movie is going to be R-rated. I had heard something about it, but I think they are sticking with a PG-13 for that one. Batman would be an excellent movie to do R-rated.
Absolutely. He could just shit all over Alfred. Who wouldn't watch that?
Yeah, right. Batman's got some very dark comics, and I think you could do some really good things with that. Like if they did a live action, or I was going to say a live action Killing Joke, but just a Joker movie, a Joker oriented movie. I think we need to see some more original concepts like that.
And that's why I think Suicide Squad was so poorly received by a lot of the fans. I mean, some of the fans really enjoyed it, but I mean, I was going to see more of a Harley Quinn, a Joker storyline, some of the more but it was more focused on this whole Enchantress plot going on. I think a Joker movie or even a Harley or anything focusing on one of the villains.
Jared Leto, the guy who played Joker,
right?
He actually he came out and said so much of my scenes were cut that if I died tomorrow and they did a Batman movie, they could use the scenes that I had in this movie that were cut and have a developed villain. And I think that's so out there that you don't hear stuff like that.
Right.
He got so into the character for 10 minutes of screen time. He was very mad about it. I think what needs to happen in these superhero movies for them to stay relevant is we've got to do more original ideas.
Right.
We need more than just one Guardians of the Galaxy to come out. That movie, for a solo Marvel movie that no one had heard of the characters, it did excellent.
Oh, yeah.
And those movies that are different, like Deadpool, those are concepts that 10 years ago you never would have thought to see. Those movies are the ones we need to see more of. Movies that we haven't already seen. We've seen 6, 7, 8 Batman movies in the past.
Right.
We need a movie that's not Batman. We've seen 4 Superman movies. We need a movie that's not Superman. We got Wonder Woman coming out. That's an original movie. Flash.
Right.
That's never been done on film. And I think stuff like that is what we need to see from a movie standpoint.
And something I personally need to see, everybody went and saw Suicide Squad because the marketing campaign was so vicious and brutal.
And it was so different.
Right. And I think too much of the character development was done through storytelling about the characters from another character. As far as Guardians of the Galaxy, and you look why it was so successful, is they developed the characters through the characters themselves, through the actions that they performed. Maybe a 10-second scene where they talked about their kind of their past and that kind of thing, but they didn't spend 3 minutes per character through another character just storytelling about them.
I think Suicide Squad isn't really a good movie to bring up in this because it's going with the things that we say need to be happening. We need to see more original concepts. We need to see different characters that we haven't seen in a movie before, and that's what Suicide Squad could have been.
It tried to do that.
Yes.
It was a great concept. It just was horrible execution.
It was all I'm going to blame it on the editing. They actually got a trailer company who edits movie trailers. It was the person who edited the first Suicide Squad trailer, the one with Bohemian Rhapsody in it.
Which was super well received. Everybody, yeah. I mean, that created a lot of hype.
Yeah, and they got that company to edit the whole movie, and you just can't do that.
That was a horrible decision.
Yeah. So, just to wrap up the video, final thoughts.
I think comic book movie fatigue is, I think it's a real thing, whether or not it's happening to right now. that's up for debate. But I do see comic book movies in general, moving in a different direction than they have been in the past few years.
Yeah, I see it. It's definitely a real thing, and I honestly see it kind of happening here lately, especially with the DCU movies, and even to a lesser extent for me, the Marvel movies. I didn't care for Civil War as much as everyone else seemed to. I thought the pacing was bad, and I think the hype built up for that movie is definitely what helped it get the reviews. Just the hype of seeing Spider-Man with the Avengers and Black Panther and seeing all the Avengers in a non-Avengers movie.
Right.
But I think superhero movie fatigue, it may not be happening, and it may not happen in the way that people are expecting, but I definitely see it happening here soon.
Right. And I completely agree with that.
So that's been the first Nerd Meets World editorial. I'm Dalton Barrett.
I'm Jamie McCray.
And I'll see you again when we meet again right here. I love you guys.
Thanks for listening.
The faggots, the spastic fat chicks who sit in the back with no one to do their lap with.